So the work is called Interchange Pavilion, and that's really about an interchanging between paths and an idea of convergence of tracks, convergence of journeys, convergence of stories. And the project has really started with a concept around the switch, the rail switch, being a potentiality of moving from one track to another. It was a Mirvac project, and Mirvac have revitalised this whole precinct with a series of buildings, and as part of that they've got a quite extensive public art program. They worked with Carriageworks, who curated that strategy and also curated this particular area. I currently have my studio in the Redfern area, which is very close to here, and I also work at Sydney University, which is also in the same area. So the way the team works in the studio is that we're constantly working with 3D geometry and outputting 3D geometry. So each of the different consultants that we're working with and each of the different fabricators are working with that geometry, particularly in relation to working with our engineer. It's a very sculptural form, and that is because all sides of this object, this pavilion, are viewed, even from above. So that was a really key consideration around how the project, how the geometry is connected to these different sight lines, these different areas, these different points of connection for public. I think there's an entire area of research which is challenging notions of architecture versus art and connections to programmatic or functional requirements versus the folly or the notion of a project really solely being about idea or about transmission of ideas. So there's 5 key materials that the project is made of. The GRC exterior, which is a really interesting glass reinforced concrete. The interior being the black butt hardwood, Australian hardwood that is expressed throughout the interior of each of the shells. There's the aluminium substructure, and then the aluminium expressed inner rails. Then there is the stainless steel ground rails, which track along the ground plane, and then the concrete, which then is expressed in the different colouring. So the GRC enabled us to pretty much develop any geometry we wanted in terms of a twisting form from the ground plane swooping up and around to the tip. We were able to develop up a set of panels that was based on ideal size for shipment, how we could control the moulding process to connect back to the cut planes, which then determined where we were connecting to the substructure of aluminium. The timber, however, is all planar. We're not bending any of the timber, so that meant understanding quite laboriously how to divide up something that is twisting in such a flamboyant way, but to divide it up so the timber could still be CNC routed. We were able to predetermine that and then connect that back to a very complicated timber rafter structure to be able to position the timber exactly where it needs to sit, so we get a continuous flowing form. That challenge of combining something that is potentially really solely about idea or is about form, mixed with something that has to be a functional requirement, was really quite exciting. And I think perhaps the project really talks to that. It is a connection to geometry, which then in turn ideally has a lead into transmission of ideas around the previous stories, previous histories of the site. The notion of the switch is a really important part of the project, where the geometry of the ground plane and the way in which these tracks are interchanging, diverging and then coming together again to create a volume, a meeting place.